Welcome to today's chilling tale, a story you won't forget. It's not about what the hikers in Redwood Forest saw. It's about what they couldn't explain. Sit tight, because this story will send shivers down your spine. Ryan was just an ordinary college student on the brink of his senior year. With the weight of school, internships, and his looming future hanging heavy on his mind, he decided to escape for the summer. He wanted nothing more than solitude in nature and the chance to breathe in the towering majesty of the famed Redwood Forest. Redwood wasn't just any forest. It was legendary for its sprawling ancient trees, scenic hikes, and mysterious disappearances. But Ryan wasn't the type to dwell on horror stories. To him, it was an adventure waiting to happen. Armed with nothing but a backpack filled with essentials, a camera, and a map, he hoped to find more than just trails. He wanted clarity before senior year took over. On the second day of his journey, Ryan stumbled upon three other hikers: Megan, the bubbly and adventurous dreamer, her cautious best friend Tyler, and Ethan, the athletic and overly confident joker of the group. They were on a road trip exploring national parks and had decided to take on the Redwood trails for a few days. Used to hiking solo, Ryan wasn't sure whether to join this lively group, but he found comfort in their camaraderie. After all, they seemed experienced, and Megan's warm smile made him feel less alone in the vast and overwhelming wilderness. That night, sitting by the fire and sharing stories, they bonded, four young explorers with no idea of the horror that awaited them. The first signs were subtle. On the third morning, Ethan spotted enormous footprints circling the campsite. Tyler, ever the skeptic, laughed it off, attributing it to bears. Megan seemed spooked, her eyes darting nervously toward the towering redwood trees that surrounded their site, but she didn't say much. Then came the claw marks, deep, deliberate grooves etched into the bark of trees close to their camp. The marks were impossibly high for any animal someone could rationalize. Ryan couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling in his gut. He took pictures with his camera, thinking, who or what could do this? That night, Megan woke up screaming. She swore she'd seen a shadowy figure crouched by her tent, peering inside. When the others rushed to check, there was nothing there, but the zipper on her tent flap dangled, as if it had just been opened. Maybe you imagined it, Ethan said, trying to lighten the mood, but Megan wasn't convinced. Ryan noticed her hands trembling as she held her flashlight, sweeping it across the dark woods. Something was off about this place. Deciding not to chance it, the group packed up the next morning and agreed to head back to the trailhead immediately. But no matter which path they took, they found themselves looping back to the same campsite they started from. At first, Tyler insisted they had just made a mistake. The Redwood trails are notorious for confusing hikers. Let's try again, he assured everyone. But each time they thought they were heading towards safety, the forest betrayed them. Hours turned into an entire day. Exhaustion, frustration, and fear took hold. The forest had them, and it wasn't letting go. On the second night of being trapped, Ryan was jolted awake by Ethan's cries. He scrambled out of his tent to find Tyler and Megan already panicking. Ethan was gone. His sleeping bag lay empty near the fire, but there were no signs of struggle, just drag marks leading into the dense underbrush. Desperation took hold of Tyler as he grabbed a flashlight and went after him. "We can't just leave him. Stay here," he shouted. But Ryan and Megan begged him to wait until sunrise. Tyler didn't listen. It was the last time Ryan or Megan ever saw him. Morning came, but neither Ethan nor Tyler returned. Now it was just the two of them, clinging to their sanity. Ryan tried to comfort Megan, but deep down, he was barely holding it together himself. As the sun dipped below the horizon once more, an overpowering dread set in. They were being hunted. That night, Megan insisted on staying awake together, keeping vigil by the dimming fire. That's when they both saw something, a figure, tall and unnaturally thin, moving between the trees. It was humanoid in shape, but its limbs were far too long. Its movements were quick, jerky, and inhuman. And those glowing eyes, Ryan would never forget how they burned through the darkness. "It's just the shadows," Megan stammered, as if trying to convince herself, but the truth was undeniable. Ryan's camera, though trembling in his hands, managed to capture a single frame, blurry but unmistakable. Something thing was watching them. When Megan went to grab more wood for the fire, she vanished. Not a scream, not a struggle, just gone. Ryan was utterly alone. Only then did the true weight of his isolation crush him. He wasn't just lost, he was prey. Fighting panic, Ryan relied on raw instinct. He abandoned his pack, his tent, everything. With only his camera and a flashlight, he ran blindly, weaving through trails and trees, ignoring the looming shadows that seemed to close in from every direction. The beast, or whatever it was there, darting into view and back into the trees, toying with him. But Ryan didn't stop. Hours turned into days, and somehow he stumbled upon the edge of the forest, collapsing onto a dirt road where passing hikers found him. When Ryan was rushed to the hospital, his condition was dire. He was dehydrated, scratched up, and barely coherent. But reporters swarmed him, demanding to know what had happened in the forest, what had taken his friends. Ryan's final words before he passed out: "It's still following me." Reports say Ryan has refused to return to the redwood forest. His camera, recovered by park rangers, is now in evidence, with grainy footage taken in his final moments inside the forest. Experts have tried to debunk it, claiming it was just a bear, maybe an elaborate hoax. But those who've examined the photos say otherwise. Even now, hikers still vanish in redwood forest every year without a trace. Some blame the wilderness. Others believe there's something ancient and malevolent lurking in its depths. What do you think? Could it be an unexplained natural phenomenon? Or is there truly a predator in the redwoods? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you liked this tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more chilling stories. Until next time, stay curious, but stay safe. In the heart of a picturesque little town sat the house on Willow Lane. For decades, people avoided talking about it, let alone stepping inside. It stood solemn and still, with ivy creeping across its walls like fingers trying to hold back the past. Neighbors whispered about it, blaming it for the misfortunes that had plagued the area. Yet despite its quiet appearance, its disturbing legacy curled deep into the fabric of the town's history. For Rebecca and James, though, the house represented something entirely different. They were hopeful dreamers in their late 20s, planning their wedding, starting their lives together, and determined to find a home where memories would be made. The house on Willow Lane called to them. It seemed perfect. Storybook charm, a spacious yard, and a price much lower than anything else in the market. It seemed too good to be true. It was. The day Rebecca and James signed the paperwork, they received the keys directly from the last resident, the elderly widow who had lived there for decades. Frail and reclusive, the old woman looked at them through watery eyes, as though searching for something in their faces. As she placed the keys in James's palm, her hand froze, as if she had second thoughts. Then she whispered with a trembling voice, "The house doesn't like noise. Remember that. Keep it quiet." Rebecca offered an awkward chuckle, brushing it off as the harmless mutterings of an eccentric old lady. James shrugged, still glowing with the excitement of owning their first home. The warning quickly became a running joke between them. The house doesn't like noise sounded ridiculous after all. It was just a house, wasn't it? Moving day was filled with hope. Everywhere they looked, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, the oak staircase, the vintage fireplace, Rebecca imagined parties, kids laughing, and family dinners. The cautious warnings from the old woman fell out of focus, drowned by youthful optimism. To celebrate, they invited a few close friends over for drinks and laughter. Music played softly in the background. It was a night of joy, but also of reckless disregard for the eerie silence the house demanded. Just as James raised a toast, a sound shattered the cheerful atmosphere like glass smashing on stone. It wasn't a knock or a creak. This was an inhuman scream, piercing and primal, that seemed to echo from within the very walls. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and everyone froze. The group exchanged nervous glances as silence fell, cold and suffocating. James walked toward the source of the sound, calling out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Rebecca dialed the police in panic, convinced a prankster, or something worse, was in the house. But when the officers arrived, there was nothing. No intruders, no evidence, just silence again. Their friends left shortly after, uneasy and unsettled. When James locked the door behind the last guest, the house felt bigger and emptier. "This is just our nerves, Becky," James said, his voice thin and unconvincing. "New house jitters. Every sound feels off because it's unfamiliar." Rebecca nodded, but the growing knot of unease in her stomach suggested otherwise. She couldn't shake a feeling, the feeling that even when the house was silent, they were being watched. Over the next few weeks, oddities grew impossible to ignore. Whenever Rebecca laughed too loud on the phone or James played his guitar, something in the house seemed to stir. Doors creaked open on their own, slamming shut again only when they fell silent. Lights flickered furiously, plunging them into darkness, always when noise filled the air. At night, whispers floated through the rooms, unrecognizable at first, until Rebecca began hearing words, "Leave, leave, before it's too late." James remained skeptical, comforting Rebecca in moments of panic, but still attributing everything to an aging house. That was until they woke one morning to find deep, fresh scratches scored into their bedroom door. They hadn't been there the night before, and no earthly thing could have made them. Terrified but desperate for clarity, Rebecca and James ventured to the local library to dig into the house's history. A historian provided them with old records mentioning how the house had survived multiple families over the decades, all of whom left without explanation, or worse, they didn't leave at all. One family in particular stood out. Generations earlier, a woman named Eleanor and her loved ones inhabited Willow Lane, reluctantly returning to the attic, one space in the house they had avoided since the night of the scream. Rebecca found an old, dusty trunk filled with relics, photographs of unidentified faces, hastily written letters, and Eleanor's diary. The diary revealed everything. Eleanor chronicled her family's slow descent into madness. She described a house that grew angry with every loud noise, a house that fed on sound to gain strength. In her final entry, Eleanor wrote, "We tried to leave, but the house bound us here. Every bit of noise gave it life, until it finally took the children. My husband disappeared next. Now I hear whispering. It wants me to stay silent forever. Houses are meant to shelter, but this one consumes." Rebecca clutched the diary tightly. The hollow pit in her stomach was plain. This wasn't just history. It was happening again. With heightened urgency, Rebecca begged James to move immediately, but frustration boiled over. "This is insanity, Rebecca," James shouted. "We're letting an old woman's spooky warning ruin everything. Houses creak, power lines flicker. Listen to me. Don't raise your voice." Rebecca screamed back, but it was too late. The walls shuddered violently. Every light bulb burst, throwing shards of glass across the room. A low roar trembled through the air, a sinister guttural sound, as though the house was breathing. Rebecca froze when she realized James's furious objections had been cut off mid-sentence. He turned to face her one last time before he disappeared into nothingness. Rebecca stumbled back in shock as blood dripped from the ceiling, forming a thin crimson trail leading to the basement door. The door creaked open by itself, and at the bottom of the stairs, Rebecca saw it, the shadow. It was alive, smoky tendrils writhing along the walls and ceiling, as if the house itself had been waiting for this moment to strike. In one final surge of fear and adrenaline, Rebecca fled the house, leaving behind the man she loved and part of her soul. Rebecca has since vanished from the public eye, refusing interviews and inquiries about the house. Only fragments of her testimony remain: the diary of Eleanor, bloodied clothes in the basement, and the screams heard across the neighborhood that night. The house on Willow Lane remains abandoned, yet somehow unsettlingly alive. Lights still flicker when neighbors pass. Whispers drift on the wind when no one should be inside. For those who grew up near it, there's no need to ask what happened. They know one thing for certain: the house doesn't just harbor the past, it hungers for it. Jamie, a college senior, and his free-spirited younger sister, Mia, are driving cross-country from California to Texas for Thanksgiving. It's been years since their family all gathered under one roof, and both are eager, well, in their own way. Jamie is the more responsible, protective older brother who meticulously mapped out the route, while Mia, sharp-tongued and known for her love of urban legends, prefers to tease him about over-planning everything. Late one chilly November September night. Beneath a dark Texas sky, painted with stars, they find themselves driving along a lonely highway. The area is unfamiliar. Rugged plains on one side, dense woods on the other, and not another soul for miles. As they chat and laugh, trying to keep themselves awake on the long drive, a wooden road sign looms on the side of the road. It's almost too dark to read, but one word catches Mia's eye: Barren Creek. She jokes about the name. Doesn't it sound like the setting of a horror movie? Jamie chuckles and rolls his eyes. After all, they have 100 more miles of highway ahead before they even reach civilization. But the mood shifts when their car suddenly sputters. The lights flicker once, twice, and the car coughs its way to a complete stop. Jamie groans. "Are you kidding me?" he mutters before hopping out to investigate. Opening the hood, he clicks on his flashlight. "Probably just a loose connection," he assures Mia, though tension snakes through his voice. Mia slouches in her seat, scrolling half-heartedly through TikTok on her phone. She notices the signal flickering between one bar and nothing. She lets out an annoyed sigh, but suddenly pauses. Somewhere faint, so faint, she almost doesn't notice it. A voice whispers, "Mia." Her eyes snap up from her screen. She looks around the empty car. It's late, they're stranded, and she assumes the wind is playing tricks on her ears. Still, something about that sound feels wrong. Too human, too deliberate. It even pronounced her name perfectly. Mia. Now the whisper is unmistakably clear. This time, it comes from outside the car, near the woods. Her heart pounds against her ribcage as she sits frozen. Slowly, she cracks the window, peering into the night. "Jamie?" she calls hesitantly. No reply, but the whispers stop. Must be hearing things, she mutters to herself. Only when Jamie slams the hood shut and hops back into the driver's seat does she exhale. "You good?" he asks casually, oblivious to her tension. She hesitates, but doesn't mention the whispers. It's just her imagination running wild. Together, they manage to get the car started again and hit the road. Relieved, they continue driving, but the atmosphere inside the car feels heavier now. The silence stretches too long, broken only by Jamie's occasional humming. And then the radio, which had been off the whole time, flickers to life with static. Jamie reaches over to turn it off, but before he can, the static distorts into something eerily intelligible. A distorted voice, faint and almost melodic, pushes through the noise. Turn around. The siblings exchange nervous glances. Mia feels a chill crawl down her spine. "Please tell me that was just a weird radio glitch," she whispers. Jamie gulps, clutching the wheel tighter. "Let's just keep going," he replies. The car speeds up. The siblings are desperate now to leave this empty stretch of highway behind. Every moment feels heavier, the silence in the car deafening, until Mia lets out a blood-curdling scream. "Stop! There's someone in the road!" Jamie slams on the brakes. The car screeches violently, jerking them forward as a tall, shadowy figure appears directly in their path. Jamie swerves hard to avoid it, sending the car spiraling off the road. A sharp crash follows as the car skids into a ditch. Jamie groans, rubbing his head. Mia, pale and wide-eyed, trembles beside him. The car is undrivable, but that's not the worst of it. When they step out, it becomes apparent they've stopped near the old infamous Barren Creek Bridge. Fog curls around their ankles as they move closer, compelled by the bridge, as if it's summoning them. This isn't just an ordinary bridge. Its beams are weathered, its planks rotten and covered in strange symbols. Mia trembles, staring into the impenetrable fog that cloaks the creek. The whispers are back, but now they're everywhere. They surround them, bouncing off the trees and the bridge. What's worse, they've taken on voices both of them recognize. Jamie hears their late grandmother's voice humming her old favorite hymn. Mia hears the voice of her childhood friend who passed away years ago in an accident. And then, unmistakably, they both hear their mother's voice. A voice they know is hundreds of miles away. This is no trick of the wind. Panicked, they flee from the bridge, but the whispers grow louder until Jamie suddenly yells out. Mia turns back, but Jamie isn't there. She screams his name, spinning desperately in every direction. Nothing. The only thing she hears is the whisper of his voice repeating her name. Mia, Mia. Convinced she's losing her mind, Mia runs blindly until, abruptly, the world feels colder, darker. When she stops, the bridge is somehow right in front of her again. Worse, it seems alive. Its decaying structure pulsates in sync with the whispers, and emerging from the fog is a figure. At first, she thinks it's Jamie. She stumbles toward it, overcome with relief that turns instantly to horror. His face face is wrong, twisted by some unearthly force. It smiles unnaturally at her. Turn around, the thing whispers in Jamie's voice. Mia stumbles backward, screaming, but more shadowy figures emerge. Their faces vague imitations of people she once knew. They reach for her, beckon with outstretched hands. Terrified, she runs again, but each step feels like the bridge stretches endlessly before her. The whispers escalate, louder, angrier. Just before she collapses, she trips and finds herself in her car. The night feels eerily silent, as if the whispers never existed, but Jamie isn't there. Terrified, Mia drives herself into the nearest town, a shell of the confident, sharp-tongued girl she once was. When she explains her story to the locals, a growing circle of somber faces shakes their heads. An older man speaks up. No one ever comes back from Barren Creek with their soul intact. As the camera pans out, Mia's haunted gaze tilts to the side. In her rearview mirror, Jamie gazes back at her, his reflection smiling unnaturally as a soft, whispering voice says, "Turn around." Did Mia truly escape? What happened to Jamie? What secrets does Barren Creek hold? Madison High School was nothing special. It was the kind of ordinary school where time seemed to stand still. The smell of old textbooks mixed with the aroma of cafeteria fries made up the backdrop of countless teenage dramas. Yet, this seemingly mundane place had a story etched deep into its brick walls, a legend that had haunted the school for decades. Whispers of the Shadow Man were passed from one generation of students to the next, like forbidden knowledge. If you see the Shadow Man in the library, he marks you, and he always collects. It was a tale no one took seriously, a story for scaring freshmen. Yet beneath the laughter, there was always an unspoken unease. You see, every tale begins somewhere, and in Madison High, it began with an abandoned wing, a dusty old library, and a series of strange disappearances no one dared investigate. The main twist in the legend occurred during one of the infamous school lock-ins, a night when students would sleep over in the school. Teachers would organize games and activities as a fun bonding event, but for the students, it was always an excuse to break the rules. This year, Alice, the confident and determined class president, had a plan. She wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. To her, the Shadow Man was nothing more than one of those silly urban legends, like Bloody Mary or the Candyman. But when her friends dared her to sneak into the abandoned wing of the school, the Shadow Room, where the sightings supposedly began, Alice couldn't resist. She liked to think of herself as fearless, someone who confronted challenges head-on. Her friends, Rachel, Mike, and Eric, tiptoed through the hallways with her, their flashlights cutting through the musty darkness. The abandoned wing of Madison High had been off-limits for years. Its broken windows and peeling paint were relics of a fire decades ago, a fire that had gutted the old library. Lockers lined the hallway like silent sentinels, their old stickers and graffiti faded with time. When the group finally reached the door to the library, the handle was cold to the touch. Alice pushed it open with a creak that echoed loudly, and they all stepped inside. The air was thick, almost suffocating. Dust covered every surface, and the smell of decaying paper filled the room. What began as a laughable dare quickly descended into something darker. While the group fanned out, exploring the ruins of the old library, Alice felt an inexplicable pull toward the back of the room. There, between the rotting bookshelves, something flickered, something darker than the shadows that already surrounded them. As she moved closer, the air seemed to grow heavier. Her flashlight flickered for just a moment, and she froze. At the end of the aisle stood a figure. He was tall, indistinct, and completely motionless, a shadow that seemed to absorb the light. Though she couldn't see his face, she felt his gaze fixed on her, piercing and cold. "Guys," she whispered, her voice trembling, but when she turned, her friends were gone. She was alone. Suddenly, a voice, low and guttural, whispered her name, Alice. Panicking, she stumbled backward, knocking over books and scattering dust into the air. Her friends appeared moments later, laughing nervously. They claimed they hadn't seen seen anything and chalked up her fear to her imagination. But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. From that night on, the strange occurrences began. At first, it was minor. Lights flickering in the school hallway, shadows moving just out of view, and the unnerving feeling of being watched. Then, it grew worse. Alice started waking up with bruises on her arms and legs, as though someone had gripped her in the night. In class, her name was whispered from empty corners of the room. Messages started appearing in her notebooks, things she hadn't written. "You can't run. Finish what he started." Alice tried to tell her friends, but they dismissed her concerns. Only Rachel seemed to take her seriously, and even then, she urged Alice to move on. But when Rachel went missing after claiming to have seen the Shadow Man herself, Alice knew the legend was no longer just a story. Desperate to understand what was happening, Alice dug into the history of Madison High. In the school archives, she uncovered the story of Mr. Grayson, a stern yet reclusive librarian who had worked at the school decades ago. Mr. Grayson was the sole survivor of the fire that destroyed the old library, but according to students who had attended at the time, he was never quite the same after that day. The climax of the story brings Alice back to where it all began, the abandoned library. Armed with an old journal of Mr. Grayson's that she had found in the archives, Alice pieced together the horrifying truth. Years ago, Mr. Grayson had made a deal. In his desperation to save the library he loved so much, he called upon something ancient and dark. This entity promised him eternal life in exchange for one thing: souls. But the fire had trapped Mr. Grayson in a kind of eternal limbo. His physical body had perished, but his essence, his shadow, remained bound to the ruins of the library. Now, he haunts the school, marking and collecting those who dare to enter his domain, feeding the darkness that sustains him. Alice realized that the bruises, the whispers, and even Rachel's disappearance were signs that she was the Shadow Man's next mark, and if she didn't act, he would continue to take more lives. In the final act, Alice faces the Shadow Man in an intense and suspenseful showdown. She reads from Mr. Grayson's journal, discovering a ritual that might break the curse. But the Shadow Man doesn't want to let her go. As the library begins to collapse around her, shadows swirl and converge, consuming everything in their path. Alice's emotions are raw. Fear, anger, and determination collide as she confronts the entity. She doesn't just want to survive. She wants to end the nightmare once and for all. With her flashlight flickering madly, she performs the ritual, not knowing if it will work or if it will cost her life. In a blinding burst of light, the Shadow Man lets out a terrible guttural scream. The shadows dissipate, leaving Alice alone in the silence of the ruined library. Alice survives, but she is changed forever. The incidents at Madison High cease, and the abandoned wing of the school is finally torn down. But Alice knows the truth. Some darkness can never be fully erased. Picture this: a crisp autumn evening in the heart of Tennessee. The woods are still, cloaked in shadows as the sun dips behind jagged mountains. Four friends, Jake, Madison, Adam, and Lindsay, drive up a winding dirt road to a remote cabin hidden deep within the wilderness. The retreat was supposed to be an escape for them. They craved silence, time away from the constant buzz of their phones, the endless demands of their lives, and the chaos of the world. The cabin was perfect, rustic, isolated, and soaked in old-world charm. A stone fireplace stood in the center of the living room, the walls adorned with hunting trophies, mounted deer heads, a fading bear's pelt, and antlers hung like artwork. Jake, the cynic of the group, made a sarcastic remark about the decor. Who decorated this place? A serial killer. The group laughed nervously, brushing off his comment. It was the start of what they thought would be a carefree weekend. Card games, s'mores by the fire, and long wine-fueled talks that faded into the quiet hum of the wilderness. Little did they know, they'd never forget that cabin, but not for the reasons they hoped. As the first night rolled in, the group settled by the fireplace. Madison was pouring wine. Lindsay and Adam were joking about hiking in the morning, but Jake couldn't relax. Something about the place unsettled him, though he couldn't quite say what. Out of the corner of his eye, he stared at one of the deer heads mounted on the wall. Its lifeless glass eyes reflected the flickering firelight, giving the illusion of life. He squinted, swearing, just for a split second, that he saw its head tilt ever so slightly toward him. "Jake, are you okay?" Lindsay's voice snapped him out of it. He forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. This place is kind of creepy, though." The group teased him, calling him paranoid, and returned to their conversation. But Jake couldn't shake the image of that deer's head. It was watching him. He was sure of it. The next morning, Jake woke up groggy, as if he hadn't slept at all. He stumbled into the living room and froze. The cabin's front door was wide open. Cold mountain air blew inside, carrying the earthy scent of wet wood and pine. Scratches covered the floorboards near the door, deep and jagged, some splintering the wood. "Did someone forget to lock the door last night?" Jake asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "Nope," Adam replied, yawning as he entered the room. "I locked it myself before we went to bed." "Really? Then how do you explain this?" Jake pointed to the scratches. The others gathered around, their faces turning pale. Madison tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal got in, or the wind, but Jake wasn't buying it. "Does the wind do this?" he spat, gesturing at the door frame, where deep claw-like gouges dug into the wood. The group brushed off their discomfort and distracted themselves with coffee and plans for a hike. But as they ventured out into the wilderness, they couldn't shake the eerie tension. Jake couldn't stop glancing over his shoulder, feeling as if they were being watched. That night, the unease escalated. Adam and Lindsay were playing cards by the table while Jake and Madison sat by the fireplace. The fire cast long, flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Just as Madison began to relax, a sound broke through the stillness, a faint, deliberate knock on the window. Everyone froze. The room went silent except for the crackle of the fire. Did you hear that?" Madison whispered. The knock came again, louder this time. Jake's skin prickled as he looked at the window. It was pitch dark outside, and from their location, they knew there were no neighbors for miles. "Probably just the wind, right?" Adam laughed nervously, though his hands trembled as he set down his cards. "That's not the wind." Jake stood, his heart racing. He approached the window slowly, his breath fogging up the glass as he leaned in to peer outside. Nothing. But Madison swore she saw a faint shadow, a flicker of movement, dart between the trees. The knocks continued throughout the night, coming from different windows, one by one. They stopped only when dawn broke. By the third day, the group was on edge. No one could explain the scratches, the knocks, or the growing sense that they weren't alone. They decided to leave the cabin for a while and hike to calm their nerves. But instead of offering peace, the hike only deepened their unease. While walking down a narrow trail, Madison stopped abruptly. "Do you guys smell that?" she asked. Something foul hung in the air, sickly sweet and metallic, like rotting meat. Jake pushed past the others to investigate and found an animal carcass, half a deer, mangled beyond recognition. Its antlers had been torn clean off, its body arranged in a grotesque, almost ritualistic way. "We need to leave," Jake said, his voice shaking. But Adam argued they were being irrational, that their fears were feeding into one another. Madison, however, noticed something. The deer's head was missing, and in its place, there was a faint trail of bloody smears leading back toward the direction of the cabin. That night, the group barely spoke. No one had the courage to address the growing fear gripping their hearts. The cabin felt different, colder, darker, as if something was lurking just out of view. As they prepared to sleep, Lindsay noticed something horrifying. The mounted deer heads on the walls. 2 were missing. Only bare spaces remained where they'd once hung. Before anyone could speak, the lights flickered out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Madison screamed, and in the chaos, faint whispers filled the air, unintelligible but growing louder, closer. Then came the thump. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like footsteps on the roof. Jake grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the ceiling. There was nothing, but the group heard it, the unmistakable sound of something crawling across the roof, its weight shifting. Suddenly, the front door creaked open on its own, revealing a pitch-black expanse beyond the porch steps. Standing just beyond the porch, illuminated in the moonlight, was a grotesque figure. Its body was warped, human-like, but wrong. Antlers protruded from its head, its limbs too long, its torso too thin. It didn't move. It just watched. Lindsay bolted for the door, screaming they needed to leave. but the closer they got to the exit, the heavier the air became. It pressed down on them, suffocating, until they couldn't move. The last thing Jake saw before the lights went out for good was the antlered figure stepping inside. Weeks later, local authorities discovered the car the group had driven. It was parked neatly outside the cabin, keys still in the ignition, but of Jake, Madison, Adam, and Lindsay, there was no trace. The cabin itself had changed. The furniture was covered in dust. Cobwebs stretched across the walls, but most unsettling of all were the deer mounts, which had somehow all returned to the walls. As the officers left, one of them swore he heard faint knocking from the cabin windows.